My dear Ava, how beautifully and with what presence you laned your parashah this morning, and indeed led the service last night. And what can I add to your very beautiful, poetic and philosophical Dvar Torah on Eve's choice of knowledge over paradise, her questioning, her curiosity, her daring to encounter change and progression. It is an extraordinary interpretation, a meditation on freedom, on humanity's desire for insight, for understanding, on perfection and imperfection and mortality. Your piece reminded me a little of William Blake's collection of poems, Songs of Innocence and Experience, in which he contrasts the innocence of childhood with a world of darker and more terrifying aspects of nature and society. Blake saw God as residing in human imagination and creativity, and like the author of our Haftarah, he believed in a personal God. Blake's faith was, of course, Christianity, but I think as Jews we can identify with his view that humanity embodies the divine presence. And Ava, you helped us to read this story from Eve's point of view, seeing her curiosity and desire for knowledge and insight as leading her into an uncertain, unsettling world, in the same way in which Blake saw the political troubles of his day in the late 18th century as reflections of our own inner spiritual turmoil. But I want to, if I may, turn from Eve's story to God's perception of events, because the chapter from which you read includes God's first question in the Torah to humanity, an extraordinary, in some ways absurd question that would be laughable if it were not so full of pathos. After the woman has eaten the fruit and given some to her man, the eyes of both are open, says the Torah. They realize they are naked and sew fig leaves together to cover themselves. Incidentally, a little tangent, if I may, the word that is used to describe the serpent at the beginning of your chapter, erom, translated as cunning, crafty, shrewd, but also can mean sensible or prudent, sounds and is similarly written to the word eromim, which means naked, in verse 7. Then the eyes of both of them were opened, and realizing that they were eromim, they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves skirts. They may not be exactly the same words etymologically, but at the heart of the encounter between the serpent and the woman and the human being's first awareness of their nakedness is a pun. The serpent is crafty, but he is also naked. He is bare in his audacity, while the human beings, having eaten the fruit, become like the serpent, hiding from God with guile, and burdened not only by awareness of their nakedness, but also their knowledge. The sound of God is heard walking about in the garden, a poetic image that conveys not the sound of God's footsteps, but something about God's presence among the trees of the garden. The man and the woman become conscious of God's nearness to them, but also God's alienation from them. God's relationship with the first human beings is disrupted by this act of, we might call it disobedience, but by God's disappointment. The quality of mercy is shifting towards judgment. This is the moment humanity must become accountable for its actions. As Maimonides says, the figurative use of walking or standing describes awareness of divine justice entering human consciousness. The man and the woman hide themselves from God, but God calls out to the man, why not the woman, we might ask, who initiated the whole eating project? Ayeka, where are you? Is this really necessary, coming from God? Surely an omniscient divine being already knows the answer to that question. The medieval Jewish commentators, Rashi and others, make the same point. How could the man think his hiding place was concealed from God? But they also interpret the question to mean more than simply, where is the man hiding? But to mean, well, what happened to the commandment that I commanded you not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil? Some commentators hear the question, Ayeka, where are you, not as one of judgment or anticipated punishment, but as the beginning, rather, of a conversation of gentleness and encouragement, as though God is saying to humanity, come out of your hiding place, let me give you the chance to repent. Rashi sees the question not as an accusation, but as an invitation for self-reflection, confession, and human responsibility. Where are you is God's plea to humanity, not to hide ourselves with shame or fear, not to become estranged or alienated from God. The Torah speaks often of our search for God. If you seek the Eternal One, your God, you shall find God if you seek with all your heart and all your soul. The psalmist speaks of our longing to do God's precepts and sees our prayers as a way of searching for God's presence in our lives. Seek the Eternal One while God may be found. Call upon God while God is near. From these verses, we imagine that the search goes one way, a journey that might bring us closer to God, that reconciles us to God's will. But God's question to the man, Ayeka, where are you, sees God in search of humanity. God waits for us to seek God's presence. The Eternal One looks from heaven upon the children of mortals to see if there are any of understanding that seek God, says the psalmist. And on the high holy days, we recall in humility, until the day of our death, you, God, wait for us to return. Where are you? Is God's search for us a somewhat forlorn search, as though God says to us, please, show me some awareness of my presence before you. Answer the call, the challenge of faith, not as a fixed state, but as a dynamic process. Ava, you pointed out something in your Devar Torah that has never occurred to me. We learn about Eve as the first woman created from the side, and some say the rib, of Adam. And for centuries, this story was instrumental in the disparagement of women, as though they were and still are in some societies secondary and inferior to men. But there is something prophetic about Eve's action in the Torah. Her eating of the fruit is not an act of disobedience. It is rather a prophetic act. Something in her is experiencing and responding to God's search for humanity. She understands with a knowledge that is prescient that God is in search of us. It is not her search for God that is underlined here, but God's quest for her. for humanity. This is what Abraham Joshua Heschel writes in his book, God in Search of Man. The prophetic act is God's turning towards humanity, and Eve becomes the catalyst for divine revelation. From the prophetic act, we learn of an insight of God into the life of humanity. Ayeka, where are you? The sound of God walking about in the garden at the breezy time of day is the Torah's search for a righteous people, for a people who will walk with God, just as Noah walked with God, and just as the prophet Micah teaches, it has been told to you, O mortal, what is good, and what does the Eternal One require of you? Only to do justly, to love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Where are we? Where are we standing in the world? Do we stand before God, accountable for our actions and deeds? Or are we hiding among the trees, embarrassed, ashamed, unwilling to be coaxed even gently by God into a conversation, a dialogue that would set us on a path towards integrity, righteousness, mercy, humility, acts of loving kindness? Ava, all of us here, your family and friends, members of this congregation, have been deeply impressed by your laning and the interpretation of your parasha this morning. It is not only your creativity, your thoughtfulness, your love of philosophy, and the gift of composition that you have revealed to us today, but also a deep sense of yourself. You described to me how you listen to music, your headphones on, daydreaming, as you put it, and that this, if I may call it, process of incubating ideas began when you realized inequalities in the world, a world which is changing, which is complex, which is fraught with conflicts that you wish didn't happen, slavery, wars, cruelty. Like Eve, you are not afraid to push the boundaries. You long for understanding and insight. You want to solve philosophical problems, but you also want to see dynamic change in the world. You are a philosopher-poet. You bring thoughtfulness, logic, and creativity to everything you do. It has been such a pleasure to have shared learning with you over this past year and longer. I pray and hope that you will continue to bring your gifts into this community of the LJS and so strengthen our progressive Judaism in our responses to the question, Ayeka,